Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing Season 8, Episode 17, Tall Story.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Tall Story.
We open with Chachi and Joni in the school gym after closing, so Chachi can practice his basketball. The school janitor yells at Chachi, but lets him stay so long as he locks up after he's done. Joni doesn't particularly want to be here either. She was hoping she and Chachi could go see a movie.
I thought you liked to watch me practice.
Yeah, about as much as you like to watch me do my nails.
Jenny comes by. Marion said Joni and Chachi were on a date, so she knew where to find them.
Where else would you be? Right.
Then they're joined by another teen, John, a new student at Jefferson.
Oh, my name's Chachi. John. Hi, John.
He saw the lights were on and wanted to play too. He blows Chachi out of the water, and Jenny convinces Chachi to tell the coach about John's skill.
I mean, with his size and speed, we can get to state finals like that.
At Arnold's the next day, Chachi finds Roger and tells him about John, who would make a perfect center for the team and take them to the finals.
Chachi, is this kid tall? Is he tall? Coach, this guy can kiss the moon.
He's tall?
He's a giant.
He's tall? Al, he's tall.
Giant.
As they're discussing John, in strolls the guy himself with Fonzie. Chachi and Roger try to convince him to try out, but John claims not to play basketball and walks away.
Oh, walk away.
Chachi is baffled, and Fonzie takes the new student aside to talk. He tells John that sports are a great way to make friends.
I don't get this jock stuff myself either, but these guys have their little hearts set on you playing b-boy, you know?
And John decides to go for it, after all. Chachi is still left with the question of why John didn't want to try out at first. The next day at basketball practice, John is introduced to the team and tries out. This time he blows it, much to Chachi's consternation.
John, what are you doing? Jump shot.
Roger thinks there might be something to Chachi's insistence that John can play. John is very tall, and he moves like an athlete. He has an idea, and sets John against Tommy in one-on-one. John fails to stop Tommy from making a basket, and Tommy subsequently makes fun of him.
I mean, this kid could trip and hurt himself. Or worse, he could fall on me.
This time, John manages to steal the ball and make a basket, impressing everyone. John agrees to be at the next game on Friday.
Hey, Coach, I'll be here on Thursday.
All right, guys, we're on our way! Yeah!
Then John's dad shows up and demands his son come home.
Come on, I want you home now. Sorry, Coach, but like I said, I can't fail you too.
That night at the Cunningham house, Roger is telling Fonzie, Howard, and Marion about the events of practice earlier. He also found out why John's father reacted that way. Roger checked John's medical records, and it turns out John has epilepsy. Roger doesn't seem all that broken up about it, being more focused on Marion's cooking.
We never had roles like this at Yale, I tell you.
Howard is surprised Roger is just giving up. Matt McKechnie from his bowling team has epilepsy, and he says exercise is good for most people with his condition.
Wait, look, I don't want to put a damper on what you're saying there, Mr. C, but don't they, have those,
Seizures,
Yeah,
Buzz.
yeah.
Yeah, they're called seizures. But usually they can be controlled with medication.
Matt's only problem is that people get hysterical when they find out about his condition. Roger decides someone should talk to John and his father, and by someone he means Fonzie. Fonzie will, as soon as he reads up on epilepsy at the library. The next day at Arnold's, Fonzie meets up with Roger and Chachi to tell them he talked to John, and said to let his father talk to him if he has a problem.
I told him, you got a problem with your father, you your father talk to me.
Oh, Fonz, I don't think you should have put it quite that way. Why not?
His father looks like a pretty tough guy.
And big. Guys, what does big and tough mean to me, huh? Nothing. What are you talking about?
Then John's father shows up looking for Fonzie. John's father doesn't need some shop teacher lecturing him on his son's condition. He's read all the books, and he's not taking any chances. Fonzie says he's not trying to take his son away from him, just let him shoot a few baskets. But John's father is worried about what happens if he has a seizure while shooting baskets. Roger says he'll have a trainer who knows how to handle it. Then John's father asks what happens after everyone sees John have a seizure.
After 2,000 people, all the kids he's gone to school with, watch them have the seizure, and he has to face them the next day. How does your trainer handle that?
Fonzie says John is aware of all of this. He and Fonzie talked, and John wants to make his own decision, and he isn't ashamed if he has a seizure. John's father laments that everyone from his wife to these guys are coming down on him for protecting his son. He'll sign the consent forms, but nothing had better happen to John.
If anything happens to the kid, it's on your heads.
At the game on Friday, Jefferson High and the opposing team are neck and neck. Roger and the team huddled to talk strategy, and a sad John says he wishes his father was here. Roger points out that his father is here, having shown up 10 minutes ago. Inspired by his father's presence, John makes the final basket and wins for Jefferson High.
That's it. Jefferson wins at 59-58. They're on their way to the state finals. This is Monty Warren Weber, game side, signing off.
After the game, John's father gives his son tips on playing and tells him he's proud of him. Later, John's father and Fonzie talk. John's father remarks he's never seen John so happy and asks Fonzie if he's ever made a mistake. Fonzie says he overslept once and then makes a basket in one shot.
Thank you, Peter. That was Tall Story. It first aired back on April 7th, 1981. Happy Days was followed that night by a new Laverne and Shirley, in which the girls get dates with two big spenders.
Your date is Steve Robinson, the aerospace engineer.
But then they worry that they may owe these guys some favors for spending so much money on them. CBS had a new episode of its drama, Palmerstown, USA. This week, Bessie's father comes home with stories of fighting in the Spanish-American War with Teddy Roosevelt and a claim on 40 acres owned by WD. And NBC had a new episode of Lobo. This week, Perkins moonlights as a security guard in a bank that is held up by two beautiful machine gun-wielding women.
This video has bikini girls and machine guns.
Yeah. And you can see their cleavage.
Among their hostages are a wounded Chief Carson and a distraught Hildy. So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
You had me at beautiful machine gun wielding bank robbers.
I'm definitely watching Lobo. There's no competition from CBS and ABC this week. Tall Story was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Barry Rabinowitz. The most recent of Barry's episodes that we covered was It Only Hurts When I Smile. As for guest stars this week, let's start with Harold Happy Hairston as Mr. Barnett. Harold was a professional basketball player from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. After graduating from NYU, where he set school records, he played forward for the Cincinnati Royals and the Detroit Pistons in the 1960s, but he's best remembered for his stint with the Los Angeles Lakers from 1969 to 1975.
The Miller people promised me a case of light beer if I could keep this ball spinning for the length of this commercial. Now, I'm not one to show off, but I do just about anything for a few light beers.
The Lakers won it all in 1972. Harold did a fair amount of acting from the 70s to the 90s. TV viewers may remember him from Columbo, Police Story, Emergency, Sanford and Son, The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo, Knots Landing, Fame, and more. He's also in the TV movie Brian's Song. His big screen credits include The Concorde, Airport 79, and Ron Howard's film The Paper. Sadly, Harold died of prostate cancer in 2001 at the age of 58. So, Peter, what did you think of Harold Happy Hairston as Mr. Barnett?
He's a pretty common character archetype, the overprotective father who does genuinely care about his son and has to learn to let him stand on his own and not be afraid of what could happen if something goes wrong. I would say that Hairston does a very good job with him. He probably gets more development than John himself does, which is kind of a shame. But I like the part where he told his son that he was proud of him.
Proud of you.
And I also liked his short conversation with Fonzie in the tag. That was fun.
I would say that Harold Happy Hairston does an admirable job with playing this stock character, Mr. Barnett. As you said, this is the kind of character we often get in very special episodes like this one. I think it helps that Harold was an actual basketball player. I think it makes him more convincing in a part like this.
The fact that he is very tall does come up quite a bit.
You said big. You didn't say big.
We also have Chris Milton as John Barnett. This is Chris's only acting role. I'm assuming he was hired for his basketball skills. Peter, what did you think of Chris Milton as John Barnett?
You might be right that he was hired more for his basketball prowess than his acting. He's not terrible, but he is kind of stiff.
Coach, there must be some kind of mistake. I don't play basketball.
He reminds me of nothing so much as the actor who played Fonzie's cousin, who was really good at flipping coins off of his elbow in that one episode a really long time ago.
This is the kind of performance that you get from a non-actor. But what is interesting to me is that for me, Chris Milton's lack of acting skills actually made the part more convincing because he didn't seem like an actor playing a kid in high school. He seemed like a real kid who might actually have this problem. My only complaint about the John Barnett character is that he's written so passively, and most of his lines are agreeing with people. Okay, I'll do this. No, okay, I'll do that.
It's kind of the same problem that we had with Allison, the character in Allison the episode. She was mostly defined by other people talking around her. It's not quite as bad with John here, but he is not a terribly dynamic character.
He's basically there to be pushed around by the other characters characters and have other characters decide his fate for him, and he gets very few opportunities to really speak his own mind about things. I should also mention that Raymond Guth and Kevin Rodney Sullivan both reprise their roles from And the Winner Is. Raymond plays Mr. Gampolo, the janitor.
College, big deal. It's a place where I got more bathrooms to clean.
And Kevin plays Tommy, a student at Jefferson.
Oh, hey, Coach, this is pretty cruel, huh?
Kevin will be back, but this is Raymond's last appearance on Happy Days. Peter, any closing thoughts on Raymond Guth as Mr. Gampolo?
I'm glad that he made a reappearance. That's a nice little piece of continuity. I guess if this is his last appearance, maybe after this he'll finally quit this job that he hates.
Possibly. And any thoughts on Kevin Rodney Sullivan as Tommy?
Still a pretty solid character. Not super well developed, but he accomplishes what he needs to within the plot.
Tommy will be with Happy Days for the rest of the run. Some people online feel that this was his first appearance, but it's not at all. He was already on the show a few weeks ago. His role is basically to be one of the gang at Jefferson High or one of the gang at Arnold's. He's basically there to fill out the cast, and he doesn't really have much of a personality of his own. As for songs this week, well, we have a bunch, but it's all stuff that we've heard before on Happy Days. Those Lazy, Hazy, Crazy Days of Summer, Personality, The Peppermint Twist, Puff the Magic Dragon, and I'm Walkin'. Once Happy Days gets its own sound-alike version of some oldie, they will play it to death. As for cultural and historical references, this episode shares its title with the 1960 comedy Tall Story, with Anthony Perkins as a college basketball player and Jane Fonda as the student who relentlessly pursues him.
Ray, this was just our first kiss. We're not married. We're not even engaged. We have to start out by being friends.
All right, we're friends.
Oh, we can be better friends than that.
Yeah.
Peter, were you familiar with Tall Story, the movie?
Not at all.
Well, if you ever want a Jane Fonda, Anthony Perkins rom-com, there is one in this world. Chachi again does his Humphrey Bogart impression and calls Joni sweetheart.
All right, sweetheart, give me all your money.
This is a reference to Bogart's performance as Sam Spade in the 1941 classic The Maltese Falcon, in which he says the line, "Yes, sweetheart."
Yes, sweetheart?
Does Chachi's Bogart impression become a runner on the show? Is that like something he does occasionally?
I have no idea. It might.
He's done it twice, and they've pointed it out both times. Fonzie jokes that John is a student at Vassar, founded in Poughkeepsie, New York in 1861.
This is John Barnett's a new student in my class.
At Jefferson.
No, at Vassar.
Vassar is one of the elite women's colleges known as the Seven Sisters, though it has been coeducational since 1969.
There's no way I'll get into an Ivy League school now. At this rate, I probably won't even get into Vassar.
I've had just about enough of your Vassar bashing, young lady.
And obviously, the subject of this episode is epilepsy, a chronic disorder of the brain characterized by recurring seizures, which are brief episodes of involuntary movement, sometimes accompanied by loss of consciousness. In the past, this condition carried a heavy social stigma and was even considered shameful. Hopefully, this is improved with greater understanding of the condition, including its causes and treatments. Henry Winkler has frequently worked with epilepsy-based charities over the years, which may be how this episode came about. Peter, how do you think Happy Days handled the issue of epilepsy?
So there's a lot of talking about epilepsy. They don't go the sensationalistic route of having John have a seizure in front of everyone, but it is discussed as a possibility and something that nobody wants to have happen because it would be extremely painful and humiliating. I think it's nice that Happy Days tried to be sensitive in its depiction, but it also has the side effect of it feeling almost like a non-issue just because it's sort of discussed, but it doesn't go as in-depth as I feel like it could have, if that makes sense.
When I see older movies and TV shows with characters who have epilepsy, it is treated as something to be ashamed of. And people with epilepsy are stigmatized and scorned. And I think part of what this episode is trying to do is show that people with epilepsy are just like everyone else. They're nothing to be afraid of.
And they have as much right to take part in everyday life as everyone else. And yeah, that part is really, really great. It might just be because John is kind of underdeveloped as a character. So maybe that's why I felt like it wasn't as dug into as much as it could have been.
Do you think the issue of seizures creates sort of a Chekhov's gun situation in this episode where we're waiting to see what would happen if he does have a seizure?
Maybe a little bit, but I'm glad that they didn't go that route.
Well, I have very limited experience with epilepsy myself. I remember being in marching band. We were on a trip with the band, and one of the members of the band did have a seizure. And I was so unfamiliar with it, as were most of my classmates, that we didn't know how to react to it. So maybe if I'd seen an episode like this in advance, I would have been more comfortable with the idea of people having seizures. Maybe an an episode like this can foster an atmosphere of tolerance in the world for people with conditions like epilepsy.
Yeah,
So,
or at the very least, it can give people in the 80s who might otherwise not have any knowledge of the situation just a general idea of, hey, sometimes people have medical conditions that cause them to have seizures, and don't be assholes to them.
I was very shocked when I saw Martin Scorsese's film Mean Streets. There's a character in that who has epilepsy, and that character is stigmatized, and it's supposed to be scandalous that Harvey Keitel's character has a relationship with her.
I swear to God, Johnny, if you open your mouth about any of this...
About what? About what?
Johnny, you know what I'm talking about.
About what? Well, you too?
And I was like, is that really what people thought about people with epilepsy back then? And yes, it was. So maybe this episode made some social progress. I hope it did. The Epilepsy Foundation says that people with the condition can and should play sports as the benefits outweigh the risks. In fact, exercise may lessen the chance of seizures. Again, though, John's father seems to be more concerned about the social stigma of epilepsy and how this will change people's opinions of John. And note in the episode how Marion's opinion of Matt McKechnie seems to change when she finds out he has epilepsy. Now, she changes her mind back to thinking he's a nice guy, but notice that for even a second, Marion says,
He seemed like such a nice man.
Yeah, not cool, Marion. I guess it's good that it only lasted for like a minute.
yeah, she only briefly has that thought, but her thinking is very typical of that time.
I do feel like it should be more relevant that John and his father are black. If it was difficult to be a person with epilepsy in the early 1960s, I feel like it would have been even worse to be a black person with epilepsy in the early 1960s. But it doesn't really come up in this episode.
This show doesn't make an issue of John's race at all. No one even mentions it, although it certainly would have been on the minds of these characters, especially at this time in American history. Fonzie asks Roger to finish the story before Fonzie is on Social Security. At the time of this story, circa 1963, the minimum age for receiving Social Security benefits was 65. It's now 62.
Thank the Lord we're growing older day by day. When those pension checks arrive, we'll be okay.
Other observations, Mr. Gampolo obviously didn't make good on his threat to quit, but one day, Peter, I feel that man could be dangerous.
You think he's going to snap and do something violent?
I think he already has. I think there is an equipment shed or tool shed somewhere on the Jefferson High property that has just souvenirs of all of Mr. Gampolo's victims.
Happy Day should have done like a horror movie episode where it's Joni, Chachi, Jenny, Eugene, Tommy, and any other recurring teenager characters going up against the janitor trying to kill them because he's frustrated that they keep ruining his good work.
They could have gotten to the killer janitor plot way before Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street. The string of Clarence jokes continues this week with Clarence trying to make hot chocolate in a toaster.
Clarence is trying to make hot chocolate in the toaster.
I agree with you, Peter, that Clarence jokes have become the new Mrs. Kelp jokes.
And I'm happy that we're still getting recurring jokes about Arnold's being kind of a terrible restaurant because they amuse me. In this episode, there's kind of a running joke that Lori Beth thinks she sees mice and Al has to reassure her, no, there aren't any mice here. We definitely don't have any mice here.
But he's also occasionally willing to joke about there being mice.
Lori Beth! A mouse!
Which is an odd thing for a restaurant owner to do. Basketball continues to be the main sport of choice on Happy Days, possibly because it's the one sport that can be played convincingly on a soundstage. You couldn't really play football on a soundstage or baseball. What do you think of all the basketball on Happy Days, Peter? Does it make the show better, worse? Does it not change the show one way or the other for you?
I feel like it doesn't really change the show one way or the other for me. It makes sense that someone in the cast would be involved in sports.
They also have a pretty decent basketball court set that they want to get some use out of. So that might be another factor in basketball being on the show so much. I wondered how many takes it took Henry Winkler to get that final shot.
I overslept once.
Since he has to sink a basket at the end of it. Note that the tag, which is only 28 seconds long, is composed of 8 separate shots, and Henry doesn't shoot the ball until the last shot after all the dialogue is done. That's how I think that scene was accomplished. I think it might have taken more takes than they probably wanted.
You are probably 100% right. Henry Winkler is a little guy, and shooting baskets is hard.
But he got it eventually, and they got it on camera. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Sadly, no. I'm afraid not.
The only thing I can say is that these basketball episodes do take place during the so-called short pants era of basketball.
You know, I understand. You don't like the little shorts,
I
right?
don't mind the shorts.
You don't mind the shorts, right?
That eventually changed.
Yeah, at some point in history, we decided, okay, maybe we should give them baggier shorts, which probably more practical, maybe.
Too much thigh in basketball. Let's cover that up. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question. Was this episode any good?
This is a pretty average, very special episode. I think it is marginally better than Allison, if only because, it does make a better point that people with epilepsy should be allowed to participate in everyday society alongside everyone else. We should prepare for worst case scenarios, but not let that control us.
This episode has an admirable social message about epilepsy and how to treat people with epilepsy, and it tells a worthwhile story, but it is a very formulaic, very special episode. When you make 255 episodes of a situation comedy like Happy Days, a great many of those episodes are going to feel like padding or just something to fill out another week. The sitcom equivalent of Styrofoam packing peanuts. Tall Story to me is a Styrofoam packing peanut of an episode. The only issue I really had with it was a scene right near the very end of the show where John and his father are having a heart-to-heart on the basketball court at Jefferson, and no one else is in the auditorium except for Fonzie, who is sitting up in the bleachers, looking down on them, smiling beatifically. And to me, that seemed like white savior kind of stuff. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I think it would have been better if Fonzie hadn't been there. I guess he kind of needed to be there because he's the one who's in the main cast, but it's a little bit uncomfortable within the context of race. And also within the context of disability.
He's literally placed on screen above them and looking down on them. And I thought, oh, is that really how you want to stage the scene where Henry Winkler is smiling down on them from heaven? They're down on the floor and he's up in the air. That felt a little heavy-handed to me. Overall, Tall Story is not an episode that you should go out of your way to watch, but it's not one that you should go out of your way to avoid. Take it or leave it. It's one of those take it or leave it episodes, Peter. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Chachi is offered a basketball scholarship to college, but is all as it seems in the creatively named scholarship.
Great. Another basketball episode. Exactly what I was hoping for from Happy Days at this point. So,
well, I mean, it sounds more like a scam episode. That's going to be fun.
I'll wait and see if it's fun or not. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Tall people got no business. Tall people got no business. Tall people got no business to be alive. They got big hairy hands, bloodshot eyes. They shuck and jive because of their size. They got great big noses, ugly green teeth, flip-flop shoes on their